and it's justified, a permit is required. And public safety needs is a very rational justification for impacts to the stream corridor. So what the best way to start is to either reach out to our 401 general 401 inbox, which I can provide, or to the specific water board permitting contact for your county, which is me in Solano County. Sending as much information upfront about the project, location and coordinates, project description, justification for the activity. Usually with that, we could determine if a permit is needed. And but we are also open to site visits whenever possible, because there can be gray areas around jurisdictional boundaries sometimes. I also always suggest project proponents reach out to the Army Corps and California Department of Fish and Wildlife simultaneously. Those are the two other agencies I'm often working with on projects such as this. And then the way we evaluate a project's impactfulness, because this differs between all agencies, we are the Water Quality Control Board, so our main concern is water quality. So I can talk a little bit about how vegetation around stream corridors are important, but I also think Kevin will have some things to say about this as well. But varying vegetation canopy, having super tall trees to low understory shrubs, allows varying levels of light to penetrate to the water resource below, and that has a direct effect on many water quality parameters such as temperature and DO. Another thing is habitat diversity. Mowed straightened channels for flood control purposes, for example, have limited stream complexity, which is vital for providing healthy habitat for many species. Finally, having overhanging canopy actually contributes quite a bit of insect life and more habitat complexity through dropping debris and bugs down into the stream. We don't look at the impacts in numbers of trees removed, which I believe CDFW does. We actually just look at how the impacts overall degrade water quality and the function and services that are lost based on project activities. And therefore, impacts should be reported on in acres and linear feet. So the square footage of vegetation treatment, as well as the length of stream that is being treated. And then finally, of course, any unavoidable impacts must be mitigated for in a form of equal or greater enhancement to the same creek or another creek elsewhere. Just has to be in-kind mitigation. So creek impacts, creek mitigation. The ratio of that is dependent on the mitigation proposed, and that's typically very much handled on a case-by-case basis. But that is a quick rundown of how we look at fuels reduction from the permitting perspective. I don't know how you guys want to do discussion or questions, but I can turn this to Kevin or answer questions now.
Yeah, I think we could probably just jump in with questions. I guess my first question is, many of our proposed types of stream activities would not necessarily include soil disturbance, but it may include brush removal, vegetation removal. How do you guys at the Water Board assess what is the potential for impacts?
Well, so like I said, if there's a lot of from shading and that sort of thing, like the things I discussed about how we kind of evaluate impacts from vegetation management, those are a few things. It is always best to leave roots intact and limit ground disturbance as much as possible. The other thing is, not only does the canopy provide shading for the water resource, but it also is covering the slope from high impacts from precipitation. And that can cause, increased sedimentation, runoff, which then a lot of our streams in the Bay Area are impaired for sediment. And depending on the land uses around, there's lots of chemicals that could be mobilized from that sort of left barren slope. So regardless of ground disturbance or not, there are still impacts associated with vegetation management. Obviously, that being said, if I would look to Kevin too to talk about appropriate BMPs and if there were ways that impacts could be limited to the point where we wouldn't have any concern over impacts to the stream. But again, that's definitely a case by case specific thing.
Okay, thank you. Do we have other questions for, let me open the chat. Do we have other questions for Aaron on the 401 side of that? You're getting off easy, Aaron.
David's got a question.
Okay, go
Or
ahead,
a
David.
comment or statement. So this is David Stevens, Pleasant Valley Fire Safe Council. I feel like one of the greatest concerns in the Pleasant Valley region is that our region was devastated by wildfire in 2020. And we are coming into a cycle where the weather forecasters, who I know cannot necessarily forecast the weather better than about 50%, but they're forecasting El Nino potentially the next 2 years. And this most recent winter, we all experienced the heaviest rainfall ever received in our communities. People are concerned that there is going to be flooding because of dead, down, dying trees in the creeks and streams. What efforts can be done to improve these creeks and streams in the most expeditious manner and provide some community support without fear of, doing harm or potentially receiving penalty?
Well, first thing that comes to mind that I want to mention is we do have permits for emergency work. So we actually have a new one that came out that typically we have an emergency permit that is issued in conjunction with an Army Corps emergency permit. But I believe we now actually have one just for state permits as well. So if there were to be an emergency like this last year, we had plenty of emergency situations arise where property was threatened because of these high flows coming from these massive rainstorms. There is a way to allow work to happen ahead of time without having to go through that whole permitting process. So I want that to be known about, that we have emergency procedures when live property, there's a whole definition for it, is threatened. And then you don't have to worry about spending a month or 2 months getting a permit. We can authorize and then deal with the permit after the fact. In terms of dealing with downed wood and how exactly to approach that, I mean, it's a matter of, I'm not an expert, I'm not a project designer, so I can't say exactly all the right ways to remove wood from a stream properly, but it's a matter of hiring a qualified professional. In fact, Kevin probably could talk about that more than I can, but the main issue is making sure that there's not too much barren slope left behind that's allowing for too much sedimentation. It's having the right erosion control BMPs when you're doing that type of work. I don't know, Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
Is Kevin unmuted?
Okay.
Here we go.
There we
Sorry.
go, Kevin. Thank you,
I was
Kevin.
listening. I was listening though, believe it or not. Our our perspective is, what is the stream classification first? If it's a class 1, and I'm using forest practice rules as classification system here. If it's class 1 anadromous fisheries, then we're going to want higher protections there. We're probably going to be a little bit more concerned about how much trees you remove from those. That being said, those are probably the biggest concerns when it comes to flooding. As you move up the order, class 2s have a little less protection. Class 3s are ephemeral drainages. So I would say it really depends. It really depends on it's a case by case basis. In general, we would want too much wood removed from class 1s or 2s that have potential for woody debris recruitment or existing. So, but you're talking about a sensitive issue. If the concern is to prevent flooding, I think we'd be pretty open to allowing a certain amount of tree removal. I can't tell you how much for, I'd have to look at the individual stream segment that you're talking about. But I could say this, we're not going to say you can't remove any trees. If there's certain log jams and things like that are a big concern, and removing some trees makes sense, yeah, we would support that.
Now,
It's
Kevin, and,
yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Kevin and Aaron, do you guys typically require like a biological assessment, or how do you ensure the applicant is in compliance with CEQA for the issuance of your permit? Do we have to have separate CEQA documents, or is your permit essentially effectively the CEQA approval on that?
So CEQA needs to be done for every project, but there are a lot of projects, especially with lower impacts, that if you're familiar with the CEQA exemptions,
That's sort of in it, yeah.
you can do an NOE, and then that's something I think each agency is actually supposed to file. But also our agency, we typically look to the closest agency to the project proponent. So usually it's the counties or cities who are performing that. And then next would probably be CDFW. It's rare that I have never completed a CEQA document for a project before, besides notices of exemption. But
Okay.
yeah.
And Kevin, if we're doing a project that say doesn't wouldn't necessarily align with a category 6 timber removal or something along those lines, a waiver, then would you also say that, I mean, that in itself is typically a CEQA approval document, as long as I have my ARC and everything else associated with that?
Mhm.
Do you guys typically need additional, if we're exempt under CEQA, how does our filing affect your decision on how much we can remove and do remove? Does that, like you said, it comes back to, if we're talking about a class 1 stream, which is a fishable stream, or at least permanent aquatic habitat.
Right.
Do you typically kind of follow the forest practice, or excuse me, the categorical waivers, or would you anticipate most of these, which aren't really, they're not a timber harvest, they're a mastication project or a brush removal project? Do you typically find that applicants require more than just the contents of the application, like a biological assessment or something along those lines?
No, and I tell you, say typically, so I could tell you a little, since early 2019, I've been involved in probably over 20, 25, 30, I don't even know how many at this point, fuel reduction type, shaded fuel reduction type projects in the Bay Area. In Marin and San Mateo, Santa Clara, Sonoma County, this is the first time I think we've had the opportunity to do anything in Solano. I want to also clarify at the beginning, Solano County, and I live in Solano County, is separated by 2 regional boards. We're not speaking on behalf of Region 5 at all. So we don't, okay. I honestly don't even know what they're doing when it comes to this stuff. To get back to your question, I think what we've seen is a real light touch approach to our streams that in these fuel reduction projects. They're really staying away from the streams, avoiding the streams, not removing much trees or vegetation. And so this is kind of, that's been the practice so far. We haven't seen that. That being said, I definitely have seen situations where it probably would benefit from removing some trees. There's some really dense canopy. Removing some trees isn't going to decrease the canopy. It's not going to lead to increased stream bank erosion or something like that. So again, it's really a site-by-site basis. It's hard to say for sure. I think a lot of your work is going to be outside the stream corridors, probably, right? But it's important to classify the streams properly first, and then you can put equipment limitation zones, ELZ zones around certain areas. You can have setback requirements. But I think it's also, if you're working with foresters on it, and I'm not sure there's an opportunity to go in and take out some trees that maybe aren't really benefiting, or they're dead, or you should do that. I don't think there's any problem with doing that. We're not going to say to stay away from the streams. If you're going to build new roads and put new culverts in, that's another issue altogether, Sure. But maybe I'm jaded too with the kind of projects I've had. We've had some large ones in the Bay Area. We've had ones of 1,500 acres, 1,500 acres, a lot of smaller ones. I'm not sure what's on your list right now in Solano County. But
well, go ahead. sorry.
Go ahead. I sent earlier PDF to Devin. It's the minimum measures that we've been following since 2019. Try to, in general, for a project, and I'll be able to share that with everybody. It's pretty, I have to say, pretty reasonable, straightforward.
Yeah, maybe Devin could post that into the chat.
Yeah.
Right.
It's we're not trying to be super tough here. My main responsibility on this is to go on the ground and look. I was just down in Woodside, for example, on Friday in San Mateo County looking at a project there. And like I said, we haven't seen much work in and around streams.
Right.
We see a lot of mastication. We see a lot of really nice clearing being done. A lot of that understory, a lot of that brush being taken out, a lot of invasive species being removed. This project that I was down at Wonderlick Park had a huge eucalyptus removal as part of their bioreduction project. So, we're going to work with you guys, I think, and not be,
Right.
don't look at us as being punitive and big bad guys. We're not going to, there's a permitting process and stuff like that, but these are also really important projects to complete.
Right. One of the impetus of this whole topic here is that, especially in the footprint of the LNU fire, there is excessive amounts of dead vegetation that are within stream corridors that, the fear is that they're going to act as wicks essentially in future fires. And then obviously continuity of shaded fuel breaks, we need to cross these systems at some point. So we might not be denuding the entire reach, but there are sections that we certainly want to address. So that's what we're looking really on the guidance on.
Yeah, I'm not a fire specialist or anything, but I've seen exactly what you're talking about, where they just leave these streams with a lot of down debris in them, and then we've seen in some of the big fires too that they do act like wicks. The fire will come right up these drainages, right up these draws, and yeah, certainly reducing the fuel. How much do you remove? I think that's the proverbial question, right?
Sure.
If we're not doing bank disturbance, if we're not increasing the potential for sediment loading to the stream, I don't know if there's a rule. It depends on the steepness of your streams and your gradient and slope there, but I really think you got to go on a case by case basis. I assume you're working with biologists, you're working with foresters, you're working with experienced people.
Sure.
And what I've seen so far is people are really on top of this stuff. I've been really impressed with the people working on this. The science is ever evolving too. But
Great.
no, I think if there's an opportunity to remove and you're not going to cause any kind of ground disturbance, you should do it. I mean, that would be my take on it. Now, that might not, maybe other agencies might have a little different take on that. Maybe Fish and Wildlife would have a different take, or
Sure.
Army Corps of Engineers, but
So we'll get Mary's input on that in a minute. We'll see if we're all on the same line, I guess.
No harm, no foul. I think avoidance of the streams is probably number one if you can't. But if you can't, or again, you're going to look at your individual. Is there houses? How close to that? What kind of dispensable space are you trying to create? There's some other factors that are kind of difficult to just say, hey, we're going to do this on every project. Every project is very different. That's been my experience so far. Every project I've worked on has been very different.
Hey, Kevin, it's David Stevens again. I got a couple questions for you. So one, could you tell us what the boundary is in Solano County for the water agencies?
It was in that PowerPoint presentation shown, I think, the third slide.
Okay.
Do you have, I don't know if that could get pulled up or not.
Yeah.
And then second,
it goes down to topography. If you get down to topographic maps and you look, what you'll see on these boundaries, you'll see streams going to the east toward the delta and stuff. So it's really based on that. Created a long time ago. I had nothing to do with it. Some of the boundaries make sense. Some other ones don't make sense, but yeah, that's generally, I think we're going to get probably most of the bigger urban areas of Solano, but you got, you still got Vacaville. It's big. Antioch.
Yeah.
Antioch's Contra Costa County, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. North of there.
So a follow-up comment would be during last year's winter, again, it was a tremendous winter, and two major thoroughfares in our community were severely impacted by flooding. And then a third one later. So Mix Canyon Road, Gates Canyon Road, and then later in the season, Pleasance Valley Road were all impacted by slides and debris flows.
Yes.
The one off of Gates Canyon Road was gigantic and was largely attributed to dead, down, dying materials that got into the creeks and streams and created a massive mudslide in Gates Canyon. Those are the kinds of things with an impending El Nino that people are worried that there is the potential to experience again. And we're wanting to be proactive for folks in our community and react proactively instead of reactively.
No, I think that's exactly what you want to do. I assume there was some culverts plugging and that kind of stuff happening.
I don't know that they ever figured out the root cause of the one in Gates Canyon, but it was enormous, the size of the slide.
And this is, I presume that this was an area that may have been, use the word neglected over time, right? This stuff was.
Well, was it maintained as we should be maintaining our forests? Probably not.
Right. Well, your concern's legitimate. And yeah, I know Aaron referenced the emergency permit, but I'm not sure that's proactive at that point. If you're going an emergency permit, you might already have issues, right?
Right, exactly.
Sounds like you want to get out and do something here, right? Before it starts raining.
That would be great.
Yes, and what we're looking also is kind of what are the sideboards around project planning? For instance, we recognize there's a difference between the federal jurisdiction of ordinary high water marks and state jurisdiction of top of bank to top of bank. Most of that actual work occurs within state jurisdiction, not necessarily federal jurisdiction. And so really it's what is the framework in determining what's worth doing and maybe what's not worth doing from a regulatory standpoint there versus need. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Well, Cal Fire still has their dead disease dying exemption permit stuff that you could pursue. I think again, getting into the stream corridors of cells is going to be the.
Correct.
I'm probably less concerned about that than maybe others are. Just based on my experience of seeing the work. I mean, you're not going to come in. I mean, you're not going to come in and just blitz an entire area and remove all the trees that could potentially fall into the creek channel and stuff like that. You wouldn't have any kind of. There would be no shade left, or there'd be nothing left. But what you're talking about is taking out all the debris what's in the channel with what's feasible. You're not going to get it all out. If there's culverts and stuff that have potential for plugging because they're smaller, those have to be looked at. The smaller the diameter of the culvert, the more likely it's going to get plugged. But do you have if there's a project coming up, there'll be an opportunity to go look at it. And I'm always willing to go out and look at stuff pre filing of anything. So
yeah, and I would just say there's never a bad time to come and ask the permitting staff to join in and weigh in on a project as well. So the earlier the better is always what I say.
Good.
So all that stuff all that plugging, all that material in that stream, what is it still there? I assume it's still there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and maybe the way to handle this next is let's have Mary talk about what the federal jurisdiction is, and then we'll circle back through. And I think that might spawn a couple other questions regarding how the state and the federal jurisdictions interplay on this. So if you're ready to go, Mary, I have your slides loaded up, and you could either tell me to advance them, or I could just give you control, whatever your permit is or preference is there.
I will this is this is Mary. I'll just ask you to do the proverbial click.
Sure. Okay.
For me. So yeah, it's really a great opportunity and a pleasure to get to talk to so many of you here after quote normal business hours. So thanks Devin for reaching out. I prepared just a few slides for sort of high level Reg 101 because I didn't want any glaze overs. I wanted to try to kind of get at the type of questions that I suspect that you're kind of after. So let's see. Oh, and who am I? I am the section chief for the California Delta section in the regulatory division, Sacramento district. Our boundary with the San Francisco district of the Corps is fairly similar. I'm not sure if it's exact, but it's quite similar to the boundary between the two different water boards. So we're looking at topography and things that are flowing toward the west or the east. So next slide, please. Corps of Engineers, we're all over the place. Sacramento district is the orange there in California. San Francisco district is the lime yellow, at least on my screen. Next slide, please. So here we are, Sacramento district, the sort of reddish pink area. That is the California Delta section. There's about 8 project managers on my team. And we do cover the Sacramento district portion of Solano County. Next slide, please. So just a real quick plug for our mission, similar to 401. You know, we're a permitting program. We take a look at activities that when they are regulated and make fair and reasonable decisions with appropriate conditions. We sometimes joke that we're a permit program and not a denial program. So we're neutral as far as projects are concerned. We're neutral as far as projects, but we're not neutral in terms of customer service and public service. You know, everybody, we want to help people out with their questions and with getting their projects reviewed as quickly as possible. Next, please. So we do actually have 3 authorities that our program implements, but one of them is in the ocean, and Sacramento district doesn't deal with that because of our geography. So I think most of what we're going to be talking about here is Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which is what regulates discharge of dredged or fill material. That's kind of the technical term. A basic type of image to have for that is a dump truck pulls up to a creek and lets out a whole bunch of gravel into the ordinary high water mark of that creek, and that would be an example, sort of a blatant example of discharging fill material. Section 10 that regulates structures or work in navigable waters. So, for instance, a dock. or a pump station within a tidal slough because tidal areas are navigable. So I'm going to keep my jargon down. I'm going to try. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to read all these words. This is a resource, sort of a takeaway, because later on in this small slide deck, you're going to see the cartoon about "I'm confused and please call us," because there are many "it depends" situations. So I wanted to arm you with some of the basics. So the top part just sort of expands on what I said before, and of course, being regulations, there's loads of definitions, and there's a definition for this thing called incidental fallback, which is actually not regulated. So you can think of drippings off of a bucket. Um, and so within those discharges, there's discharges that require permits under Section 404, and there's several exempt activities. So the whole top part of this slide is talking about what activities may or may not be require authorization under 404. The bottom part of the slide is speaking to geography. You know, when those proposed activities are, say, within the ordinary high water mark, that is the Section 404 jurisdictional line. So somebody had mentioned, that distinction, 401 top of bank, which I didn't realize. So I'm glad to learn that, top of bank. And so we're going to be further down at the ordinary high water mark, which sort of kind of aligns to maybe the 2 to 3 year flood. So not high floods, but not the summer trickle. Next slide, please. Okay, I wanted to just mention section 10 in case you do have work in, say, tidally influenced rivers or sloughs. And there are some differences between section 10 and section 404. Section 10 does not actually have exemptions. And so I would sort of advise if you're going to be in tidal waters at all, that you maybe, give us a holler. But I don't want to have to spend more time on it here other than to mention that, because I'm not sure how big of a deal it is. Next, please. Oh, we're going backwards. Okay. So trying to kind of roll up and just a couple more slides here. Roll up what I've been talking about is well, the first question, if you're looking at a fuels reduction site, is are there any waters of the U.S.? Some of you might know that there's a brand new revised definition of waters of the U.S. So we're trying to figure that out right now. But say you've got a perennial creek. Okay, well, that's going to be a more obvious case. Point number 2 is speaking to the section 10 that I just mentioned. If you have, say, we'll use a creek as an example. Would the activity actually result in a discharge of dredged or fill material? And I'll provide some examples here shortly. And then the fourth point is, even if it would result in a discharge, is there an exemption? And I'm gonna also mention the exemptions that we have. Next slide, please. Okay, so no permits required when these are sort of the main buckets of sort of reasons when no permit is required under section 404. There's the series of exemptions, which I'll have a list in one of these next slides. They're under section 404F. So you'll hear people, trying to be fancy with their language saying, oh, it's a section 404F exemption, but there are several of them. Section 404 actually does not regulate clean excavation. Clean excavation is not a regulatory term, it's a married term, but it basically means if you're kind of scooping out scooping and not grading, and then depositing that wetland material or stream material into a truck or into an upland, i.e. you're not filling a water with that same material that you've just scooped up. So that's that's sort of an interesting nuance. Section 404 regulates the discharge, not the excavation. Now, I think that the last point here is something you all are going to be pretty interested in, which is cutting, pruning vegetation, whether you're talking about felling a tree without disturbing the roots, mowing, that type of thing. Next slide, please. Almost done here. So again, this is a takeaway, just so you have a list. But there are several exemptions that have been in the Clean Water Act since it came to be in the early 1970s. A couple that might be of particular interest to this group are the maintenance of drainage ditches. In short, that one of the things that provides for is sort of clearing out ditches. We're not talking about natural creeks, but clearing out ditches of stuff that's accumulated to bring it back down to its design grade. That's an exempt activity under section 404. There's also, as you may know, there's a whole series of agricultural related exemptions. So if you're dealing with a agricultural in that type of setting, those exemptions may apply. Next, please. Okay, so as Aaron said, if if possible, to achieve the objectives that you need, for the public safety with fuels reduction, if possible, to do that work when to be out of the gray areas of, do I need a permit? Then that's a best case scenario. You go ahead and do your, get whatever entitlements you may need, and not have to deal with the water agencies. So where you might start getting into that gray area with our regulations is grading. So I sort of said pushing, excuse me, pushing the soil and substrate around. So you're not sort of cleanly excavating at this point. You're pushing stuff around. Mechanized land clearing is basically fits this category. So I found the lower left picture there to kind of try to illustrate. You can see, the earth itself is sort of ripped up below below the original grade. And then, as I mentioned before, if you take excavated material and you plop it, you plop it next door in a wetland, you're actually discharging fill into a wetland. So that's just taking care of your excavated material. Put it in an upland site. Next, please. Summary. So here's what I promised. The lower left, it says there's all this gook on the wall. When you put it like that, it makes complete sense. So I applaud anybody who has been able to follow all of this, because, as Aaron said, regulations, I mean, any program has some complexity, and wanted to try to provide some basic information and a little more you can take away and look at. But in terms of a summary, please mow and trim above ground to heart's content. Upon hearing some of the other questions, even sort of cleanly removing, removing items. If you're not going into sort of full out mechanized land clearing, removing items like a tree that's fallen across a creek. It might not even touch our jurisdiction if it's fallen from one bank onto the next. Putting mats down, like for equipment, is not typically considered fill for us. If you're there during a squishy, wet time of year. So again, clean excavation and 404 exemptions. And please, as Aaron and Kevin said, we are here to support. If you have any questions, in fact, the project manager, we have a lead, Jeffrey Wong, who's our lead for Solano County, and he just went on vacation today. Otherwise he would have been here, and you could have met him but I wanted to at least get us connected, and some of you may be bouncing questions with Jeffrey here down the line. I think that might be my last slide. Let's see. Yep. Okay. I had to end with a vernal pool because I'm in the Sacramento district. So there you go. Thank you. I'm glad to answer any questions.
Great. Well, I'll jump in with a few. And both the state can jump in on this too. Can you explain whether or not, and I understand this is a project by project basis, but we've used your regional general permit 8 as a maintenance activity for fuels management in certain areas of region 5. Is that a viable, within these areas, is that when we don't have an emergency per se, but we have a project that's laid out that way? And quite often we have a partnered 401 that's aligned with that RGB 8. Is that a reasonable mechanism for us to pursue when we're lining out projects like this? And then my second question really has to do with woody debris as a fill component. And this has to do with the methodology at which we remove stuff. Clearly, when we reach in or either hand remove or excavator remove material without soil disturbance, there's no fill component. But sometimes when we masticate, we're actually placing woody debris or chip with potentially within and I've had situations where I've had to permit the placement of chips because um, my understanding is the Corps' interpretation of that is that chipped material, masticated material would be considered fill within water in the US. Can you speak to that issue, or is that too project by project specific?
Those are both, yeah, those are both, sort of, yeah, those are both nuanced questions, but yes, it's at some point from when vegetation is sort of, just, branches with, freshly pruned branches, and when they're turned into more of a wood chip situation, is sort of in the definitions, which would take a little time. One of these, it depends case by case. I think you're right that when it becomes sort of processed woody matter, organic matter, that could then be interpreted as fill. And our Regional General Permit 8, which we actually just reissued in August for the next upcoming 5 years here in the Sacramento District, that is a tool. It's not always going to be appropriate, but yet we've had some interesting. It covers emergency activities, and similar to what Aaron said, yes, there's a specific regulatory definition of that, and we actually do it in California. In the California portion of Sacramento District, we have a general order, or sort of a programmatic 401 for that RGP 8 for the Sacramento District, and it's something to look into. It's something to bounce with us. Call us and run it by, because historically we use the RGP 8 to kind of plug a levee that had been busted after a big storm. Like, that's kind of the thought. That's a really straightforward example of use of that. But we are considering, because of what we've seen for flooding, and of looking at a situation where looking at a situation and saying, hey, if this set of conditions lined up for this winter, then there would be an emergency, and we can't discount that enough. We just made that call on for a Delta island with several bad scour areas around, and it's like, if that failed, there would be a really bad situation. So in order to help them get that work done, so we do make those judgment calls. It's worth running it by us.
Sure, we have a couple other questions on here for you. Anybody?
Yes, Chief Eberzini from Suisun Fire District. I'm going to have a few kind of towards Aaron, Kevin, and Mary. So at the fire station, we get quite a few people that do come in, and it's kind of more based on a private property perspective, not kind of big project work that's being designed. So does everything that we've kind of discussed tonight geared towards the private property owners with the creeks and streams?
Yeah, I would say all of
Good question.
all of the things I said about 401 permits, it's all scalable to whatever scope of work. And I kind of was mainly talking for the purpose of private landowners as well.
Okay, because we've had a lot of discussion. We've had Fish and Game come in at some point in time, and there was some questions asked about mechanical equipment down in the creeks to remove trees. And what we were told is no chainsaws, no mechanized, motorized equipment in creek beds. Is that correct?
Yeah. I was going to ask you actually for a more specific question than that, but yeah. I mean, it's not an absolute, nothing's ever an absolute no for the permits. It's just a matter of justifying, and then if there's unavoidable impacts, they need to be mitigated for. With the private landowners, it's not really like there's any different set of rules. Sometimes we are more flexible depending on their limitations that they're dealing with. Permit work is expensive, but yeah, it's all the same regulations.
Okay.
I would say like, I'm surprised CDFW had said, well, I've never said, no, you can't do that. It's just not allowed per our regulations. It's just a matter of justifying why it has to be done, you know?
Okay, no, I appreciate it. I just want to make sure as a residential for property owners to be able to really understand it's just not a giant project work, that this comes down to the local property owner himself of what we're discussing here.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Alfred, we had asked Cal Fish and Wildlife to attend to discuss, specifically to discuss their 1602 permit regulations, which also address elements of that, and they were unable today, but we'll follow up with some additional information on that.
Okay, well, thank you guys.
Do you have anybody else?
Hi, this is Paul Dawn from Backville Fire District. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Okay. Alfred brought up something that was really good in regard to clearing out these things. If there's going to be restrictions on the use of modern equipment, chainsaws, masticators, whatever, you're not going to get anything accomplished as far as cleaning out these tributaries, creeks, and streams of the dead materials. I mean, it's just the reality of it. You're not going to be able to hire crews to go in there and just using axes and hand saws. I mean, I've gone out and looked at the area from the LNU, and there are quite a few trees that are dead and dying, and a lot of them are, particularly the pines, are rotting away. And there are a lot of people who are on the elderly side of life who are property owners up in that area, and there's no way that they're going to be able to either find somebody to do the work or do the work without the use of modern equipment such as saws, masticators, chippers, that kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, this is going nowhere if those kind of restrictions are going to be placed. It's either, do you want to get the materials out of the creek beds or not? But I mean,
Right.
is it Fish and Game that's putting the hard stop on that?
Actually, I don't think it is. I've done hundreds of projects in California, and I've never had a chainsaw restriction in a water course. In fact, we actually permit like a category 2 specifically where we've hand followed water courses. I believe Tracy's got her hand up and could probably talk to this issue as well. Tracy?
Then I'm just wondering if I just missed.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. You can definitely have chainsaws in, and Water Quality was talking before about the Forest Practices Act, and that pretty much says that you have to maintain a certain amount of the canopy, especially of native vegetation in and over the streams. But definitely you can do chainsaw work. Getting bigger, like masticators and stuff in creeks, is way more complicated. So we definitely push for doing what we call hand thinning with chainsaws.
Oh, I understand that. Okay, thank you.
And I would just offer that if any significant ground disturbance should be repaired. It has to be. So, I mean, I don't think the water board would be opposed to using, if you have to use equipment in some of these, as long as you repaired what you damaged, the ground wise.
Yeah.
So there's no sediment delivery. So now
Yeah.
I understand exactly what you're talking about. Some of these areas are so chock full of down trees and vegetation, it's almost impossible to get in there to begin with. And then if you have that limitation, you can just use hand tools, and it becomes,
Well, nothing will get done.
no, right. I realize that. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
No, we have to be reasonable and practical in what we require too. I think we're trying to do that. That being said, we don't want, D6 dozers diving through and creating all these, roads and all that. Nobody wants that, I don't think either. So
No, we don't want to see the land torn up. That's
right. Yeah. No, I believe you can do what you're proposing to do and still protect the ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not sure who was first, whether that was Tracy or Rochelle. Put your hand up first. One of you guys want to jump in?
Sure, if I can real quick, we started doing our shaded fuel break work, and according to the Cal VTP, just in terms of the water course, on class 1 and class 2, it basically said that 75% of the surface needs to be left undisturbed. We need to retain like 75% of the overstory cover and 50% of the understory cover, and there's got to be a 30-foot no-cut buffer off of water courses. So, and there's some other specifications on that, but we weren't limited to using chainsaws, as long as we were following these type of guidelines.
So did I hear you correctly, Rochelle, that all of your VTP work in there has a 30-foot no-cut buffer?
No, in the project work that we just did,
right,
it has it. So we haven't gone to, bigger waterways or the canyons and ravines, the larger ones, but some of the streams, that was what it was. But leaving much of the overstory and actually quite a bit of the understory is still intact as well. So.
Right. Yeah, and what we typically find on both on the CAL FIRE side and water board category, timber waiver category type work, is that we're quite often allowed to reach into a riparian buffer zone or a water buffer zone, as long as we don't have ground disturbance. Let's say we have a tree that we hand fall, we can reach in and pick it up with an excavator, as long as our excavator does not enter the water buffer zone. That's a normal California practice, California Forest Practice Act type of activity, but we declare anywhere that we're going to be doing that. We typically aren't allowed to skid that material out. So I can't go in there and cable skid it out, because then I have ground disturbance within the water buffer zone. So those are those kind of nuanced differences in what type of vegetation we're removing. A lot of them, if it's brush, we're going to hand pull it out of the corridor, masticate it to the outside, as opposed to, say, permitting a masticator to go into a water buffer zone.
Same for us. A lot of it had to be hand pulled out. So
correct.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And just the one clarification, Rochelle, I think about the VTP, at least in the one that we're doing in Napa, is those numbers, the 75 and 50, are for native vegetation. So if you have some non-native vegetation, probably you could go in and take all of that out, as long as you're still leaving cover. You've got to maintain some cover. It's common sense.
thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I have an add-on comment that I sort of hadn't thought of, but really sort of not knowing the scope of or sort of the breadth of these issues out there, out there in Solano County, and perhaps more broadly, but we have the capability, if there's interest expressed, we can explore it together. We have the capability to consider developing a regional general permit that is specific to, fuels reduction or, wildfire safety. We just have to define what those categories of activities are. And basically, when for situations that may require a permit, get a streamlined process into place that is even more available than, say, this regional general permit 8, where we need to call it, and we need it to fit the definition of an emergency. So just planting a seed in, because I assume you all are, there's what's going on locally, but we're here to ask those questions in case there is interest. We can explore it, and even on a district-wide basis. There may be a lot of other fire councils talking about these type of matters, and there might be a regulatory tool we can develop.
Great. Yeah, one of the things that our objective here down the road is to provide all of our partners enough of a guidance that when they start thinking through projects and designing projects, we can anticipate a little bit how much regulatory interactions we need on these, and what can be done with individual landowners and things like that. I mean, we have a lot of, like David mentioned, there's a lot of areas where big old oak trees from the LNU fire laying in a creek system, and you just can't get them out unless you permitted a piece of equipment to go in and get them, you know, unless you're going to whittle them into little pieces and hand haul them out, which is pretty labor intensive. So there's always that break point at which we could do some things that are under the allowable side versus at what point do we hit that threshold and need more agency interaction. That's very helpful. Thank you, Mary. Do we have anything else? Okay, well, thank you very much, Aaron and Kevin, Mary. We appreciate your guys' time after hours, and we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights on this.
Oh, you're welcome. I put in a chat. I put a link to the State Water Board's waiver for vegetation treatment project. So just to maybe this could fit into what you're proposing to do also. But let us know if you have any questions. If you want to get on the ground and look at some of these areas, I'm glad to meet out there and meet you wherever.
Great. Now, do you guys maintain a normal, a standard sort of pre-application meeting where all the agencies come together when we do have a meeting? We get everybody on the same table, or is that a standard practice? It is in some regions, not others.
Because we're with Region 2, I would want Mary to speak to Region 5's, but I know that the Core and the SF district holds an interagency meeting once a month. So if there are projects in Solano that are in Region 2's area, you can apply for or send in a notice for the interagency meeting they hold once a month. But it also can be done casually by reaching out to myself and other agency contacts, and we can try to coordinate as much as possible as well.
Great. Thank you. And I don't know if you saw that chat there. Rochelle had the nice comment there that we certainly appreciate, and I'll post this presentation that I believe has your guys' contact too. But if you wouldn't mind dropping your contact or email into there for follow-up questions, we appreciate that.
Well, just give me a second. I'm sometimes computer challenged, you know. I just want to take one that I've already.
Great, thank you. Well, if we want to jump over to our partner and app updates, we could run through that. To get that list up, let me run up to the original agenda here.
So I'm gonna sign off. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
We appreciate all your guys' time.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We're done, Matthew? Is that what you said?
Yeah, you guys are good. We appreciate the time, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, have a good night.
Good luck with everything too. And
thanks, Aaron. Great.
Yeah. All right, take care.
Right, Rochelle, you want to give us an update on Green Valley's work?
Sure. So I don't think I was able to share the last time I was with the meeting with you all, but we were funded another grant for phase 2 of our project with CAL FIRE. So we're excited about that, in the amount of about $600,000. And this is just going to continue and extend the work that we've already begun. And right now we're just kind of gearing up. So in the project planning part, so as soon as the work can begin, we'll get started going at it again.
Well, congratulations. That's great to hear.
Yeah, thank you. We're excited.
And just curious there, Rochelle, is the VTP work you did originally, does that cover the second phase 2, or do you have to expand that work to cover this phase?
You know, most of it is covered. We do have to do a little bit of botanical surveying and archaeological surveying to complete it. So, but most of it was already taken care of. There's just some of these follow-up areas that need to be surveyed.
Sure. So, and those are T&E species or sensitive species is what you have to survey for on the botanical side?
I'm assuming so, yes.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
David, you want to jump in on Pleasant Valley?
I'll give a brief update. Good evening, everyone. David Stevens, Pleasant Valley Fire Safe Council. At our September meeting, we had two guest speakers, one from the California Department of Insurance, and the other individual was from United Policyholders. They both spoke to the current state and conditions of the California homeowners insurance market and the various challenges that people are experiencing. They also addressed that the California Department of Insurance is currently reviewing contracts with all of the insurance providers in the state of California, and their plans have to be approved by the California Department of Insurance's office. And that process is underway and continues. They attempted to convey that people should hold out hope that there may be opportunities in the future for insurance discounts and continued opportunities to stay with your existing insurance companies, but they did indicate that some insurance companies are absolutely pulling out of the state of California. But they said it is not a catastrophic situation, that people shouldn't panic, and that people should continue to remain hopeful that the market will stabilize. We've also been working with Team Rubicon, and we are hoping to begin property assessments in the community sometime in the next month or so, and just start to develop a plan for how and what projects need to be done in the Pleasant Valley region. And so we look forward to working with everyone on that and making some headway on these dead, down, dying trees that are causing anxiety to everybody. So hope everyone has a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I know Karen's out today, but Sierra, are you jumping in, or Chris? You got it, Sierra?
I'll jump in, and then I will just say if Chris has any additional updates on his side of things, he's more than welcome to jump in. Yeah, Karen's out. She's not feeling well as well, but we don't have too many updates as far as I know. And I last checked in, we are working to help groups, especially neighborhood communities, establish fire safe councils. So we're still working on that. We are meeting with a couple homeowners associations and a few other community groups within the Vallejo area coming up, which is pretty exciting, where we're just trying to help neighborhoods and community members organize their own smaller fire safe councils and getting ready for planning, preparedness, and awareness regarding wildfire and things along that line. So that's really the only update I have. I'll go ahead and drop the email address for anybody that might be interested in getting more info regarding that in the chat, in case anybody knows or they themselves live in a community that's interested in starting something. So yeah, unless Chris has anything, that's really all we have on our end.
Thank you, Sherry.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I actually have a little bit, and that discussion that we've had from the several guests, it was very pertinent to a major effort that we have right now, where we're working with landowners to map hazard trees along Pleasants Creek and some of the drainages. So basically working on the things that we're talking about as far as being able to target hazard trees that are on embankments and just up from the bank, and trying to figure out the rules and trying to figure out what we could actually do and try to build a blueprint for actually moving forward. Because as you saw in that presentation, it was, I think, scarier than clear as far as moving forward, and very site by site. Whereas I think landowners and we all want more of a playbook that we can go and we can follow. So I know that Karen and myself, we're going to be working with the county and Matt and his team to try to create some basically playbooks so we can actually go and cut down some of these trees. And it's very specific to certain areas, but we're talking about some of those rotting gray pines or ghost pines that are 3 feet around and 80 feet tall that are on the edge, and figuring out how we can take out 100 of those. And we have funding right now, and we're going through the permitting process and all basically the process that you just saw. And we've got a couple RPFs on board, and we're actually trying to figure out that process right now. Because if we don't get out some of these bigger trees, they're just going to fall in the creek. They're going to rib out. They're going to cause the erosion that people are worried about, and they're going to block bridges in the Pleasants Valley. So so that's kind of what our main focus is on right now. Also, on a kind of a lighter side, we do have a plant sale on October 28th at Roostaller. So if you want to go buy plants, have a beer, and talk more about permitting in the streams and how we can get trees out, that would be a good place to do it. So that's my update.
Thank you, Chris. We have Tina is in. Tina is, I believe you joined us last month, but Tina is new with OES, and she's sort of Robin's right hand over there. So Tina, do you have an OES update for us?
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join today's meeting. Don't have many updates. I have one. Thank you for those who were able to contribute any suggestions or feedback on the CWPP. Today was the last day to submit any feedback or suggestions. We are hoping to get that over to the Board of Supervisors to get on the agenda for next month. So again, thank you so much for those who were able to submit some feedback. We are greatly appreciative, and we will be reviewing all the feedback soon.
Great, great. Chief O'Connor, you on? He was. Can't. Sorry, list here. And if Chief O'Connor's not.
Yeah, Chief Representative can give the update.
Okay, there you go.
Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Again, we're still continuing on working on a lot of standardizing some of the assessment forms for the county. We're still trying to get through the process on some of that. So the goal is to make it easy for everyone to kind of work with the same exact forms across the board. So that's hopefully by next year we'll have all this complete. Other things, been a few fires within the county. Just continue to be fire safe, try not to mow after 10 a.m. and just kind of keep your eye on the weather. So hopefully everything starts to cool down and things start to slow for us, but thank you.
Thank you. Chief Concepcion. I don't know if we have anybody from the Fire Department's Chiefs Association here today. Hearing none. Justin, CAL FIRE, are you with us today?
Yeah, good evening. Justin Bangarel, Assistant Chief, CAL FIRE in Solano County. Just update, we all resources for the state are available to the county. It's 31 engines, 6 bulldozers, 5 fire crews, 4 helicopters, 2 air tankers, and a aerial supervision. So we're at full strength now. On the grand scheme of things, a relatively benign season so far, but of course, as we all know, that can change in a moment's notice. Everyone, please continue to be vigilant. Some of the weather forecasts are looking for some wind, possibly Wednesday, Thursday. So we'll see what that looks like. Other than that, that's all for CAL FIRE. End of report, and I can take any questions if anybody has anything. Thank you.
Any questions or see any hands up on that? Okay, how about YOLO Fire Safe Council? Tanya, are you with us today? Let's see. Look at our list here. Or Napa Firewise, is Sherry with us? Talk with her.
If Sherry's not here, I can mention some really good news from Napa. This
Great.
is Tracy.
Jump in there, Tracy.
Napa County got awarded the FEMA brick grant. Well, they said we're going to get it. It's still going to be a while before it's actually officially awarded, and probably a year or two before it starts, but it does include that big project that Mike Wilson came on last year. We talked about along Skyline, Wild Horse up above the, I think, was it the Vallejo water supply? Anyway, so really good news that can eventually tie into some of the work that Green Valley's doing. So that's exciting. And one
Very
other, one other thing for folks to know is the state's California Forest and Wildfire Resilience Task Force. So that's the group that meets quarterly and talks about all these issues and how do we deal with them and increase pace and scale. The next meeting is happening October 5th and 6th up in Reading. And it's a great time to, like, if you're interested in this subject, to go in and learn about who's doing what. They always start the first morning with a resource fair. So a lot of the groups working on it, like RCDs, fire safe councils, other organizations, have tables and they're talking about their work. And then the agenda is always really interesting. I always learn stuff there. And then the next day they have field trips. So it's open to the public. I think the website's wildfiretaskforce.org. Highly recommended if people are interested.
Great. That's a really great event up there. So that's be good. Who else? Normally we have, I'm looking for other. Kelly, do you have anything from the land trust that you'd like to share?
Hi, everyone. Nothing to report this month, but thanks for the opportunity. Appreciated the conversation.
You bet. Ron, do you have any updates on the political side of the world from Senator Dodd's office?
Yeah, there's always a lot going on. And as was mentioned earlier, I was just going back through my emails for another update on all of the homeowners insurance issues. And unfortunately, they ended the session without coming to a decision as far as how they're going to address the issue. So as it was earlier stated by Dave, the idea is just be really vigilant at this point, and that we are hoping that that situation is going to get resolved here in the next couple of weeks. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Do we have anybody else with any updates for us? Okay, hearing none. I'm going to go ahead and put my email in here. If there's additional things that you think about, would like us to make sure we incorporate in the notes, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll make sure that gets in there. Or if there's additional information regarding these presentations, I can send you the presentations from Mary. We also have a PDF guidance document we'll post out with the minutes of this. So,
hey, Matt, it's David.
Yes, David.
Hey, real quick, Pleasance Valley did have a representative speak from the Department of Fish and Game about a year ago at one of our meetings, and the individual provided a really wonderful overview of their program. And, you know, although it's given the illusion that, you know, people can't do anything in the creeks and streams. When that speaker spoke, you know, they provided very similar feedback to what we're hearing this evening, that there are opportunities for people to do work. You just have to be careful and creative and you know, be proactive and responsible and don't be destructive. But there are opportunities to improve things in the creeks and streams. So you know, I can try to track down that presentation, see if we still have a copy of it, or even find the contact that spoke at our meeting. But that individual did a really great job speaking at our meeting.
Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, we thought we had Cal Fish and Wildlife was going to join us on this one, and they had to bail out here at the last minute. But I'll follow up with you, David. Maybe we can get that same individual back. That'd be good, or at least our content of their presentation.
And then at some point, you know, I know you indicated that you had reached out to Region 5, but almost all of the Vacaville Pleasance Valley area would be covered under the Region 5 area. I'm curious, based on Kevin's comments, that he has no idea what's going on in Region 5 and what Region 5's allowing. I would be curious what differences there are between Region 2 and Region 5 and how those may impact our community.
Yeah, my experience has been, you know, everybody's running under the same rule book, and there are slight differences in policy and interpretation and timelines. But, you know, I think from what I heard today, things that were mentioned for Region 2 hold true for Region 5 in general. But we'll certainly get Region 5 folks lined up if we're planning efforts up that Pleasant Valley area. I believe we have Nancy on the line too. If Nancy, I don't know if she's just listening in, or do you have any other information you'd like to share, Nancy?
Not for tonight, but thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think with that, if there's nothing else, raise a hand or jump in. Otherwise, we could adjourn the meeting. All right, with that, I think we're good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Have a good night.
All right.
Thanks, Sierra.
Good night, everyone.